Good afternoon, I'm Stacey Ann Providence and this is TTT Live. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has returned from the CARICOM Intersessional meeting in Barbados and is hosting this week's post-cabinet media briefing at the Diplomatic Centre in St. Anne's. We take you there now for live coverage on TTT, Talk City 91.1 FM and TTT Live online.
Good afternoon to members of the media, to our viewing and listening audience. Today at our post-cabinet press conference, we are happy to have Dr. the Honourable Keith Rowley, our Prime Minister, to address us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public. My apologies for us running a little bit late. The cabinet went a little bit longer than anticipated, so we are running a little behind schedule. So I'm very grateful that you are able to stay with us. Today I want to touch on a couple of matters which are of interest to you and the national community. As you would have been informed at an earlier time this week, we had the Intersessional CARICOM Heads of Government meeting in Barbados under the chairmanship of the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mr. Mayor Motley. This intersessional meeting took place in the early part of the week, and I have with me here, having returned last night, the communique which is customarily issued at the end of the proceedings. But because we came in last night, we were unable to provide you with this. So what I will do this afternoon is just mention a few of the highlights of the work of the last 3 days, where a number of things would have taken place. I must tell you, it has been quite a detailed and stressful series of hours of going over these issues. I'll just mention to you the outcome. Firstly, at the bilateral level, before the heads of government meeting took place, Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago proceeded along the lines of some work we had been doing before. As you would be aware, Trinidad and Tobago's offshore exploration into the deep water has taken us now up to our blocks, exploration blocks up on the Barbados border in the southeast corner of a territory. And now those blocks on the Trinidad and Tobago side are being explored by BHP and other companies. And the expectation is that the geological formations that we are now penetrating in Trinidad and Tobago side, that some of those formations also exist on the Barbados side. So in anticipation of any future prospect of this area, the government of Barbados and the government of Trinidad and Tobago, cooperating together at an earlier time, had signed a memorandum of understanding to proceed in a way that will allow a facilitation of investigative work, and to be followed later on by any encouraged exploration drilling on the Barbados side. And what we did on Monday is to sign a unitization agreement in advance of any of this exploration work taking place, meaning that in the event that the exploration is successfully identifying any commercially viable resources there, that Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados would have already agreed to extract those resources on a unitized basis, meaning that if the pools cross the border from one territory to another, that we'll have no difficulty in extracting whatever belongs to either territory, and that such developments will allow us to bring to market in a much earlier period anything that we may find. It also opens the door for improved seismic work across the border, and Barbados has also granted exploration licenses to two of their blocks which adjoin Trinidad and Tobago's border. So this unitization agreement, having been signed, is a major step forward in the exploration of offshore acreages belonging to Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados. And we await the outcome of these seismic work and then exploration wells, and then later on, if we do find commercial deposits, we then can do the third and final phase, which is to agree on operationalization of this activity in hydrocarbon prospecting. And another thing we agreed to, Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados concluded some discussions we were having towards improving our diplomatic footprint in Africa and Asia, where instead of having separate territorial missions in those areas, that we could jointly establish missions abroad for Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados' benefit and operate as a joint mission, starting with our missions in Nigeria and Ghana. Trinidad and Tobago currently has a working mission in Nigeria, and we have a consul and significant interest in Ghana. Barbados is about to operationalize a mission in Ghana and has no mission in Nigeria. So what we'll start out doing is having a Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados mission in Nigeria, and a Trinidad and Tobago Barbados mission in Ghana. And how we propose to work out the details is that we will rotate the headship of these missions over time. So every 24 months we change the leadership, and at all times we'll have a senior person from the other territory in the mission, and we'd share the cost and we'd mix the staff. This would allow us to have more missions and have improved diplomatic contact and spread our interests abroad in countries that we are not now fully engaged. We used to have a mission in Kampala in East Africa. Under this government, we had closed that mission, but we still have interest in East Africa, especially in light of the fact that major UN missions are now operating out of Kenya, and we need to be present there if we are to participate and benefit fully. So what we've agreed, there's Barbados interest, CARICOM interest in a mission in Kenya. When that is operationalized by Barbados, we'll use the same model that we're using in West Africa. And we have a mission in South Africa. Barbados has none, and Barbados is interested, and we've agreed that we will use the same model in West Africa, in South Africa, so Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago can have a joint mission in South Africa. And the same thing we expect to apply when we move towards sharing a mission which would allow us to have a mission in Abu Dhabi. You may recall sometime early on, Trinidad and Tobago had attempted to establish its own mission in the Emirates, but then there were some developments, some international developments, which had called for pause, and so far we did not proceed as we had anticipated because of those major international developments with Qatar, the United States, and the other states, and so on. Now we are aiming to return to that area with Barbados and share a mission which will allow us to have a presence in that very important and fast-growing area, and the same thing in South Korea. So this is a development which will allow both Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago to be more effectively present in these locations where we have trade and other interests to be pursued. At the heads of government meeting, the major issue that we spent time on was the question of the Caribbean single market and economy. As you may recall, there was a single agenda item of a meeting here in Trinidad, which allowed us to conclude the Sundance Declaration, where we committed to certain aspects of unity and openness with respect to a Caribbean single market and economy. What this last meeting has grappled with is the fact that decisions that we have taken then have not resulted in certain kinds of actions that should have followed from those decisions. and we examined those in great detail. And one of the conclusions we came to is that the CARICOM Secretariat, which is experiencing a significant budget shortfall, did not have the human resource capacity to pursue some of the things that were assigned to the Secretariat to get done so that the CSME decisions could be properly and effectively operationalized. Barbados has agreed, in the absence of any increase in the financial allocation to the Secretariat, Barbados has agreed to provide 2 members of staff on secondment from the Barbados government to assist the Secretariat in being better able to cope with the demand of the workload that's placed on the Secretariat to carry out the CSME decisions. And this is a mechanism that we hope to apply to assist the Secretariat in being a little more effective. And what was expressed was a determination to increase the pace of implementation, taking into consideration the financial and human resource constraints. And of course, what I'm going to do, as soon as this press conference is over, the staff will give you an electronic copy of the communique. So all that I'm telling you here and in greater detail would be available to you in that electronic copy. So the intention is to continue to pursue the single market and economy decisions, and you will hear more about that in the coming months, and we intend to do some more work as we prepare for the meeting in St. Vincent, which should be a normal heads of government meeting, not an intersessional. This will be a full meeting in St. Vincent in July. We received a report of the Commission on the Economy, and the report proposed initiatives for building resilient economies and easing the impediments to doing business in the community. There were a lot of interest in responding to this whole question of ease of doing business, and of course maintaining, in the context of a single market and single economy, doing it all in such a way that the benefits will apply to all the territories and not to one as against the other. Most interestingly, not too long ago in one of these meetings, you would have been informed that we had invited the private sector to be an integral part of these heads of government decisions. So there is now a regular private sector agenda item on the heads of government meeting. And in this meeting in Barbados, the private sector, which is labor and civil society, was very powerfully represented and made a presentation. And the heads of government welcomed the information from the private sector that the private sector has formed a grouping called CARICOM Private Sector Organization, CPSO, and it had been established as a non-profit organization with headquarters in Barbados, as well as the private sector's perspective on a strategy to increase regional production and address the region's food security concerns. Heads of government also welcomed the offer by Trinidad and Tobago to provide on secondment 2 persons to assist the Caribbean community in developing some of the recommendations from the CPSO. By this we mean that the CPSO did a wide-ranging presentation on areas that we could attack to bring about a reduction in the region's food import bill and to improve the region's food security. But we wanted to move from the generalization to specific project orientation, and that would require the Secretariat extracting from what the private sector presented. And in this area, we didn't want to be hamstrung by staff shortages. So Trinidad and Tobago will assist the Secretariat with finding 2 appropriate officers who will work specifically on this package of presentations by the private sector. And the heads of government noted the presentations and agreed that a prime ministerial subcommittee on the CSME would consider the recommendations and advise on the way forward. All of this in an attempt to ensure that we are pushing the single market and economy, not vision, but operations forward. We had very detailed presentations from CARFA on the subject of the region's response to the coronavirus, the COVID-19, and the heads of government considered a regional approach to the virus as we received this detailed briefing from CARFA on actions being taken and to be taken throughout the region to prevent the importation and transmission of this virus into any Caribbean territory. As the government recognized that the risk of transmission of the virus in the region remains relatively low, but that an outbreak could reverse economic gains of Caribbean states. So in short, if it ever gets to us, it will be very serious, but it hasn't got to us, and hopefully it will not get to us. But we have to be prepared, and we have to be responding in a way to eliminate the ease of transmission into our region. Heads of government commended the work of the regional international institutions because they're all engaged in this assignment of protecting us from the virus. And it's the CARICOM Secretariat, represented by CARFA, the Pan American Health Organization, as well as the CARICOM Implementation Agency for Crime and Security Impacts, the Regional Security System, RSS, which has been responding very quickly in taking samples or suspected samples of suspected instances for immediate testing. Quite a few of those have gone on, and so far, fortunately for us, none of these tests have been proved to be positive. But when symptoms appear, there's great concern, and the testing is required to bring about a satisfactory response. And of course, there's CDIMA, Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. And all of these agencies are tasked with and are involved in some way in protecting us from the entry of the virus. We also received a report and had significant discussions on it because the experts in the region, from some Trinidad and Tobago personnel were involved and other high-ranking personnel from the health sector elsewhere in the region, pointing out to us at the level of heads of government that heart disease is unusually high in our region, whereas in developed countries there was a 6% loss of personnel who suffer heart disease. In our region, persons who suffer heart disease, the catastrophic outcome is 37%. And the reason, what they've outlined to heads of government, that the main reason for that is that we are not in a position to respond in such a way as to not have the worst outcome when citizens of our region experience heart attacks. So even though we are doing more with respect to the whole question of non-communicable diseases, persons who are doing less, like in developed countries where they are doing less, their catastrophic rate is much lower than ours because they can respond. As a matter of fact, it was pointed out to us, frighteningly so for those of us who were gathered there, the number of high-ranking political leaders in the region of various ages, some even quite young, who had demised as a result of heart failure. Whereas in the United States, you had the case of Bernie Sanders in the middle of an election campaign, having a challenge and being treated and returning to the campaign a few days later and is moving on with a clean bill of health. Because in his country, there was a response that was available Not that the incident didn't take place. It took place. But the response was such that people had been able to be treated and return to some semblance of normalcy. Whereas a similar response in the Caribbean, there was a 37% chance that such a person would have died. And what the heads of government welcomed the proposals for preventive measures to arrest the trend through the implementation of a protocol aimed at transforming the care of those who suffer cardiovascular diseases. They reiterated the needs to address the prevention of heart attacks and other complications from non-communicable diseases. Heads of government recognized that implementing the proposals would build CARICOM's capacity to address the incidence of heart disease, and in that regard mandated the CARICOM Secretariat, the Caribbean Public Health Agency CARFA, and the Caribbean Cardiac Society to prepare a draft regional strategy aimed at identifying critical regional public goods essential for operating that strategy. In short, we need to improve our capacity to respond in a life-saving way to citizens who would have suffered challenges of heart disease of that nature. Under security, where Trinidad and Tobago has the lead responsibility, heads of government expressed deep concern about the continuing high rates of crime and violence throughout the community. In agreeing to address the matter as a public health issue, heads of government will hold a summit of member states and a regional multidisciplinary partnership in Trinidad and Tobago in early April. In short, what is happening here is that the experts are advising us now, experts in psychiatry and psychology, are advising us that what is happening to us with respect to violent conduct in the region is a public health issue. And a response is required, and a notification and conversation is required along that line. It's not simply a question of crime being committed and statistics being bandied about, but what we have is a major violent crime situation, which is a public health issue. In many territories, the numbers of people who are dying by violent action has gone up exponentially. And violence is a response to normal human activity in our region today that it was not a few decades ago. And that is a public health issue. So CARICOM is going to, along with other things, introduce this as part of its response, and expect that territories would begin to focus from this angle of prevention and a response as a public health issue. Has the government commended the CARICOM ambassadors in Washington for their sterling work in advancing our effort, our continued effort in fighting this de-risking that is taking place with our banks. It remains a big issue for us, and heads of government deplored the ongoing unilateral, arbitrary, and non-transparent blacklisting strategy employed by the European Union and now by individual European Union countries like France and the Netherlands. They noted that while some member states have been delisted, other member states are still negotiating with the EU to be delisted or to avoid further blacklisting. What is happening here is that at one level, we have a requirement in the multilateral arrangements to meet certain conditions. And even when we meet those conditions, the European Union as a bloc was not taking it at face value that our territories had met those conditions. They were setting conditions arbitrarily and applying it to our territories, even though we are meeting the international standards set by the multilateral groupings. And outside of that, even EU countries themselves are not prepared to be satisfied with what the EU was doing unilaterally. But the countries themselves are now taking it upon themselves to designate Caribbean territories as areas earmarked for delisting or for blacklisting and labeling as havens for offshore banking, which require certain kinds of punitive actions. And this remains a major concern of ours, and some major initiatives are underway from CARICOM, moving as a unit under the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda. And you would remember that I went to Washington a few months ago and met with members of the American Congress and Senate who are having responsibility for financial services. And those meetings are bearing some fruit in that we are having persons from those areas of authority intervene in trying to assist CARICOM countries in making our case, in preventing this kind of unilateral or unbalanced approach in treating with our financial situation. Because if we lose this fight, it can have far-reaching consequences for our banking sector, which will have a depressing effect on our trade and tourism and all of that. So we're having to fight it at the top. And what we have been recruiting more influential persons. You may recall at one time we recruited and got the support of the president of Chile, who intervened on our behalf, and the president of Estonia. So we have been diplomatically trying to fight this issue, and we continue so to do. The Caribbean heads stressed that the defensive tax measures threatened by the European Union states could have serious financial repercussions on vulnerable CARICOM states and their ability to attract the investments needed to build resilient economies. The measures have the potential of causing devastating economic, social, and political consequences for all our states as a result of the harm that can be inflicted on our global image, our economic competitiveness, and resource mobilization efforts. Has the government agreed that the ongoing actions of the European Union constitute a blatant violation of our sovereignty? With respect to resilience and digital transformation under the leadership of the government, the Prime Minister of Grenada, has the government recalled the approval of CARICOM single ICT space as one of the key inputs to digital transformation and to building technological resilience. We identified the removal of roaming rates within the community as a key component of this initiative. You may recall an instance of a minister in this government traveling to a CARICOM territory and not adjusting a phone in a particular way, and the roaming rates skyrocketed to something ridiculous, which formed a conversation here for quite a while, because just being in the territory for a few days and your phone automatically drew down tens of thousands of dollars in charges. In this regard, has the government welcomed the efforts of the Right Honourable Dr. Keith Mitchell, lead head of government for science and technology, who along with colleague heads are advocating for the telecommunications operators to institute a modest fixed single CARICOM roaming rate for all CARICOM nationals within the region. The rates would include local and regional voice calls, data, and over time will include more services. We are, as a unit, confronting the providers with this proposal, and we are hoping to get a fixed and reduced rate for government websites and so on. Because what is happening now is that there's an extraction of benefit, much to the disadvantage of nationals and the governments of the region. So has the government agreed that a technical committee with oversight from the Prime Minister of Grenada will conduct the negotiations towards eliminating roaming rates. One area that took most of our time yesterday, well into the evening, was Haiti. I'm not sure that the local media interest has been following what's been happening in Haiti. But the situation in Haiti is very dire and very serious in that the president has not been able to have a government accepted by the parliament, and the parliament's life has expired. Other elected bodies, their life has expired. So under the Haitian constitution, for the recent past and currently and going forward, the president is the only authority in office in Haiti ruling by decree. And the population is up in arms against that. So every day there is disturbance in Haiti. There is report of the breakdown of security in that the police is having its own challenge to the absent government and the rule by decree. And also there are reports of explosions and activity of lawlessness where armed gangs have been kidnapping people, man, woman, and child. And unfortunately, we have been unable at the level of CARICOM to be as fully engaged as we wanted to. Yesterday, we were able to make the kinds of contacts that we required with the President of Haiti and the Foreign Minister. And arising out of extensive reports and discussions, the heads of government reviewed the situation in Haiti and recognized the complexity of the issues. They recognized that there was a multiplicity of views on the way forward. Heads of government agreed to dispatch a team of senior officials led by the Secretary General to Haiti to meet with all relevant stakeholders. What I tell you here, the outcome of the situation in Haiti is a large flow of people from Haiti into the BVI, into Jamaica, and into the Bahamas. And in fact, it is so serious that BVI citizens are now apprehending and tying up Haitians and literally reporting them in ropes to the authorities. And the numbers are in the hundreds at any one time. And a significant number of people are in the Bahamas, providing challenges to the Bahamians, and of course, Jamaica. So the deterioration of the condition in Haiti is having that kind of effect, very much like we face here with Venezuela. The same thing is happening in the Northern Caribbean as a result of the deterioration in Haiti. We did receive the Foreign Minister of Canada, who replaced the Prime Minister of Canada, who was due to visit us on Tuesday, but at last minute could not, and had directed that he be represented by the Foreign Minister. So we met on Monday night in preparation for that meeting, and we met the Foreign Minister in plenary on Tuesday, and also we worked over lunch on Tuesday with Canada. We had a very long discussion with respect to this whole question of Canada's initiative with the cooperation of CARICOM to improve and strengthen ties between Canada and CARICOM. The Canadian government has asked for a Canada-CARICOM summit in May, where the Prime Minister of Canada would lead some initiatives. CARICOM has made certain requests to Canada, and we expect that our requests in all their forms would be taken. We have been given the assurance by the Foreign Minister that CARICOM's position to the government of Canada would be given the highest priority in the coming weeks. And in the event that the invitations come to us for this summit in May, CARICOM heads have agreed that we will continue the discussion that we had in Bridgetown on Tuesday. Also, given the improvement or given what is happening with our UN requirements in those agencies that are based in East Africa, and our outreach to Africa and Africa's outreach to the strong diaspora in the Caribbean, Kenya has offered to host a CARICOM African Union Summit in June. What is happening is that there are a lot of international business taking place now, much of it of great interest to CARICOM nations, negotiations for replacement of old treaties, defense of trading arrangements that we are benefiting from, new non-rules-based actions of some countries which are detrimental to our outlook. In short, what this is, there's a requirement at this time for us as a group of small nations to strengthen our position by attaching our interests to external support. And what CARICOM is doing is building up our relationship with the African Union, which is a large bloc of over 50 countries, who can support CARICOM on many of our initiatives. We have found that some of these African countries are very keen to advance our interests and to work with us in partnership. And it's in this context that Kenya has offered to host this CARICOM African Union Summit. In June, they expressed the view that such a meeting would contribute to strengthening the relationship between the two regions, particularly in trade, investment, and cultural ties. Heads of government noted that the visits of the presidents of Ghana and Kenya to the region and the prime ministers of Barbados and Jamaica to Africa demonstrated a rekindling of interest on both sides to forge deeper ties. They also noted that the CARICOM office has been opened in Kenya last December during the visit to that country by the Prime Minister of Barbados. That is the office that we, Trinidad and Tobago, propose to share with Barbados in Nairobi. And of course, at an earlier time, a few days ago, you would have been advised that consequent upon a year of reaching out to the diaspora, Ghana has touched base with all territories in which there are African populations under the rubric of Year of Return, and that has come to an end now and would be celebrated in Ghana on the 6th of March, which happens to coincide with Ghana's National Day. Trinidad and Tobago, through its Prime Minister, has been invited to be the guest of honor in Ghana at this very auspicious occasion. I have accepted that invitation and would be leading a delegation to Ghana, leaving here on the 1st of March by way of London to Ghana. And we would be featured in this significant development in Africa. We have already some significant entry into Ghana, recognizing Ghana as the gateway into the underbelly of West Africa, where the potential for trade and business is an area of interest for us here in Trinidad and Tobago, in areas where we have some expertise in energy and where there is potential for trade and agriculture. So on this visit to Ghana, I take the opportunity to have a meeting, a high-level meeting in London with BP to advance some significant discussions that we have initiated, and I would be accompanied in London by the Minister of Energy and Minister Young from the Office of the Prime Minister to open some discussions with BP on matters of mutual interest, and have, on conclusion of that meeting, which takes place on March 3rd, on the 4th of March, from 4th of March I move on to Ghana and spend the 5th, 6th and 7th in Ghana and start my return here on the 8th. So that is what's ahead of us, and I may remind you again, I did tell you 1 year ago that I would be due for medical examination again in a year. That year is up in April, At the end of April, I intend to subject myself to another medical. I'm hoping that the results will be as positive as it was the last time, but I do have it, so I'll be away towards the end of April for that purpose again. So that's an overview of what been happening, what's been involving my time and country's time. And I trust that you would understand that these are the ties that bind, and these are the times in which we live. If you have any questions, as I said, you will get the full communique immediately issued to you from the staff. So you'll have all the text from the meeting last night in Barbados. So if you have any questions, I will take them now. Since you have no questions, yes. The what? Prime Minister of Jamaica. I'm the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, eh?
Yes.
And what are you asking me?
Well, the meeting, is it that there's a division within the region as a result of the meeting with Pompeo in January?
No,
Did the leaders address this elephant in the room, you know?
No, that elephant wasn't in the room. The room was one of great camaraderie, and we had very serious and long and detailed discussions on a number of topics. It's not uncommon for one or two prime ministers not to be at heads of meeting. We always try to be there. But, for example, the head of Guyana was not there. Guyana has an election coming up in a few days. So Guyana's president was not there. The Belizean prime minister was not there either. Some heads came in, and one or two had to leave early. But the Prime Minister of Jamaica, he was on his way, well, was supposed to be there, but at the very last minute, we were advised that he couldn't make it, and he was represented by the Foreign Minister. So Jamaica was very well represented. I make no interpretation, and I heard none made as to any other reason why. Because, sometimes you have certain things developing, and you couldn't be in two places at once.
Could I just, I just want to shift gears now to the judgment that was issued yesterday by Justice Kokoram. And basically, is it that you, as Prime Minister, are now legally required to reconsider the decision you made with respect to the Chief Justice?
I just want to make one thing very clear. This matter is not a matter between me and anybody. This whole kankatang, and I'm sure you understand the meaning of that word, is a matter between the Law Association and the Chief Justice. Let us not lose sight of that. All the concerns and the allegations and the accusations and the whatever is the Law Association and the Chief Justice. The office that I hold, Office of Prime Minister, is only involved in this matter because in the Kankatang, I was invited in first as a witness, which I declined, and then I was invited, secondly, when all else failed, invoke Section 137, which under the Constitution happens to lie at the office of the Prime Minister. From this very podium, I would have indicated to all and sundry how that request was made to me and how I proceeded. And of course, having done so, I went as far as to provide the Law Association, one of the combatants, with what advice I got, independent of my own office, independent of this country. I sought advice from London, QC, far removed from the Kankatang here. There were those who felt that I had not done what they wanted done and proceeded to the court. I am not surprised, and I'm quite pleased that the sanguine judgment of the court has now been done, published, so the population knows that a judge has looked at what the Prime Minister did and came to the conclusion that the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, who was invited into this Kankatang, has not acted unreasonably, has not acted illegally, has not acted improperly, and that is all I am concerned about. That the people of Trinidad and Tobago could go to bed and sleep well, knowing that in this matter, as adjudicated upon by a judge, notwithstanding all that has been said by others, that the judge has concluded that there is nothing there for me to answer. I have also seen it said that some part of what has been put there, and I dare say that in my submissions to the court, because I had legal representation, and I did put an affidavit to the court, I had put nothing to the court with respect to my political duty. However, in the judgment, there is the intangible of a request to reconsider. I respect the courts of Trinidad and Tobago, and if there is a request for reconsideration, nothing could be easier and cheaper.
Just a follow-up on that. The judge's request to reconsider came with the recommendation that you remove whatever the notion that you may have had that the Law Association was moved by political bias.
I thought I just explained to you in great detail how I proceeded to make the decision that was challenged, and that decision was found not to be unreasonable and not to be illegal and not to be improper. And I rest my case right there. I'm not going to enter into any further discussion on the matter, and I am not going to deny myself that I'm standing behind this podium as a geologist, a politician, and the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, if there are any legal interpretations to be had, as I've done before on this matter and on other matters, I said to you before on many occasions, I do not advise myself in matters of law, and I would be advised by my legal assistant. So there is nothing.
Who think that the request to do what you're being asked to do is a kind of, it's sort of an impossible request to sort of remove.
What I will say to them?
Yes, that you cannot, as a politician.
For me, there are occasions when silence is golden, and this is one of those occasions. That is not for me to interpret. That is for the population to interpret. I have always stayed within the confines of the bounds of my responsibility and my duty. And I'm very pleased that the judge spelled out in simple English that notwithstanding all that was being advanced, that my actions have been proper, not found to be illegal, and not found to be unreasonable. And frankly, I want no further involvement in the matter.
Prime Minister, I'm still trying to figure out if you're going to reconsider it or not. And if you'll be seeking legal advice to reconsider. What's the next step?
I have said all that I want to say on this matter. Okay? And if there are any legal requirements, I would be advised by my legal assistants. Okay? Thank you all very much.
Mr. Prime Minister,
You have more questions?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes, another issue.
Okay.
During your absence, the issue of the chief immigration officer and her frequent traveling, which one assumes the cabinet would have had to approve.
Really?
Is the cabinet approved?
I am head of the cabinet and I am not aware that I am monitoring the travel of the chief immigration officer. I read the papers and I saw certain information. The chief immigration officer is approved. Those are I don't know who approves. I tell you what, there are instances when travel is approved by cabinet, but there is travel that's not approved by cabinet. There are other levels of approval, and I suspect that may be at work there. I am not. Until I saw in the papers details of certain kinds of travel. Like you, I would have seen it for the first time. So it's not a cabinet matter. But I must tell you, though, that I had reason to raise not too long ago when I again saw through the media that people were routinely being given 6-month appointments. And what annoyed me with that is that I know that as a cabinet, we had taken steps and made significant investments so as to prevent that kind of development from taking place. I mean, using machine-readable passports and staffing the organization and doing what we had done, I was very surprised that we were, in fact, we had reversed, because we did, in fact, at one time get passports were being issued in a much, much shorter period of time. And, you know, you could be close to the church and be far from God. But in this case, I mean, I had no idea that until people started to complain that they were routinely getting a request. And that is unacceptable. And that is why the minister intervened in the way he intervened. And I hope that the steps are being taken to reduce it in the way that the minister has indicated, that it be brought down to some reasonable arrangement where passports could be had in the time frame without this kind of stress and duress that people are going through. So we are attending to it, and I don't know if there's a role in it, in the outcome. Public servants have certain responsibilities, but those of us in the political arena, in the executive, we have to be very circumspect in how we deal with public servants. Otherwise, you will be the first to be there in the accusations, questioning the government's actions. And there are certain things that you have to slow walk and others that you can speed up.
Policy with respect to what?
But policy has no life on its own. Policy is dependent on the life of individuals who carry out the policy. Policy on paper has no life of its own. It has to be carried out by people. And that is why sometimes policy is stated and goals not achieved. But we are addressing it, and I'm sure that in the very near future, the minister will be able to report that there are significant improvements.
Mr. Prime Minister, for this year, we have seen a further spike in crime rates, in particular double and triple murders. Do you want to share your thoughts on that? Because, I mean, it is creating further concerns among the citizenry.
Well, I'm a citizen too. And we have been experiencing this ongoing violent behavior coming from all quarters of our society. The very latest one is the report that you just gave us there. Who's going to guard the guards? Even the guards don't give us the comfort that they are not among the statistics. There's a level of violence being expressed in our society which has to be focused on other than statistical expressions. School children having an argument. It's violence. Husband and wife having a difference of opinion. It's violence. Someone bunks you in the pavement by your shoulder. It's violence. Someone look at you, don't like how you look at you. It's there's just too much violence in this society. And that's why we're saying that it is a public health issue which need to be addressed. So I can go on every day and issue statements of condolence to those who are the victims of the violence. That doesn't address the violence. We can spend all our resources, over $1 billion a year, chasing down who did what. Doesn't address the violence. And money that should be spent on other productive things, we're spending it on responding to the violence. That's what it is. And therefore, we need all hands on all the levers. There's no magic bullet. It involves the home, it involves the school, it involves the place of work. It involves confined spaces and open spaces. And a question to all of us, who are we? I mean, look at what happened with the child. Look at what happened to the mate of an officer that you don't expect. We can't plan for that. And of course, we can pass laws. But now, I distinctly recall when the law was being passed about, what you call it? To keep people away from you. Restraining orders. I distinctly recall when that debate was in the parliament that there were two schools of thought. One, that we have to have it so that people who were thinking about doing wrong could be restrained and protect those who are potential victims. And there was another school of thought that this restraint in itself will generate anger and violence. Look at what's happening. What do? Do we strengthen it by making it more restrictive? Because at the end of the day, it comes down to the behavior of an individual. Uncontrolled anger, absence of anger management, and of course, in many instances, not effective consequences. In the area of domestic violence, what we see is only a small part of what is made public. It horrifies us. But we do know for a fact that there are tens of thousands of other cases that we never hear about. And that's where the trouble is. Some people are suffering in silence. They don't make the hit parade. They don't make the stats. They don't make the news. But the violence within the home and the close person and the quality of life of some people, just horrendous. So we are looking to see whether there's something being missed, whether there is something else the government could do. Is there another area of focus? And I dare say yes, there are other areas of foci. And if there are, we got to go there. We got to get into our schools. We got to get into the schools and try to inculcate into the next generation as part of the curriculum. There's no sense in spending all the resources on physics and maths and geography and whatever. But somewhere inside, there's a beast that would be unleashed, that would result in blood, violence, and murder because you can't control yourself in a moment of anger. We need to go there. And that's where the psychiatrists and the psychologists are taking us now.
So when you talked about violence and crime now being a public health issue for CARICOM as a region. Did you all look at pockets of crime in your region from countries? How did Trinidad and Tobago rank?
Well, it is not a question of pockets of crime anymore. There used to be a time in this country where violent crimes could have been plotted on a map, and only certain areas. So when you hear about a shooting or a killing was Laventille or Enterprise, you know. Today, because of the availability of the tools of war and the national violence threshold, you can hear it and get it from any part of the country. That is the change that has happened. This is no longer a question of area or pockets of, and it's not just Trinidad. The reason why it's a CARICOM thing here now is that this is not just a Trinidad issue. It's not pockets in Trinidad, in areas of geography. It's not Trinidad alone. It is every Caribbean territory reporting this upsurge of crime and senseless violence. So there's something here that we have to address outside of the statistics of the outcome.
So there's this meeting in early April, you said, that will be held here in TNT. Are there any independent measures that we would be taking ahead of that meeting?
Well, we'll prepare. We will be required to prepare for the meeting, and certain aspects of expert analysis would be presented to governments for governmental action in the government's areas of responsibility. The government runs the schools. The government does public safety. So if there's advice to be had, we will be open to it. And that conference is meant to bring out other areas where the government should be alerted and to see what kinds of responses can add to our present effort.
Kind of hoping for a timeline just to get a sense of how soon, I mean, honestly, Mr. Brett.
Well, the meeting takes place in April, but we're not holding this out as the magic bullet. It's an area. We are looking to see whether there are areas that we have neglected and what that neglect is and how it can be addressed to give us a fighting chance on all fronts. And this is just the latest one. We are spending a lot of resources in fighting crime in this country, but the efforts are not bearing the kinds of fruit that we anticipate.
To get onto the heart disease that you were talking about, you said it was more fatal, at least in CARICOM, there's a 37% chance of death. Are we giving any consideration to taking any independent measures to, I don't know, a lifestyle change, possibly, or any campaigns?
Well, as you know, the Ministry of Health is very aggressively pursuing a non-communicable disease strategy. And this is I'm trying to get people to focus on their own well-being and have an input in that. Yes, we are. But more importantly, we want the capability to respond in a way that could give you a fighting chance if the episodes take place. And that's where we're focusing.
You're talking about when the disease gets really bad, like heart attack. When you say response?
Yeah, well, I don't want to pretend that I know the details of this, but the doctors are telling you that there are certain conditions that may or may not be observable before the episode. But what you want is that if the episode is taking place, that you know what to do and how to do it. For example, they gave us details about, how much time you have to respond, if you do have to respond. And if the response time is spent not receiving the treatment that could be had, then the outcome could be serious. Right? On the other hand, if during that time certain kinds of responses are available, then you could have a pleasant outcome. That's what we're talking about.
And just my final question. You spoke a lot about Kenya.
About what?
Kenya, sorry. To have a meeting here, they're to host a CARICOM, not here, CARICOM summit in June, as well as Canada, the pitch to remove visa restrictions for...
That's one of the requests that we made to Canada, that you know, the whole question of the inconvenience of requiring a visa to go to Canada, we raised it in the context of our historical arrangements and how this came about, and it's one of the issues we put forward.
So we've seen that these are two countries that are lobbying for posts at the UN Security Council. Are they just trying to get our votes? I mean, or is the relationship symbiotic?
We have a very close and ongoing working relationship with Canada, Trinidad and Tobago, and elsewhere in the Caribbean, but we in Trinidad and Tobago in particular. Our parliament, we work very closely with the Canadian parliament, and they have given us a lot of help in staff improvement and governance issues and so on. And Canada has been, you know, very present in our development. However, we believe that over time, that kind of relationship that we used to have has deteriorated. It got to the point of us having to have visas to go to Canada. On the Venezuela issue, Canada took a position which was very different to ours, and we were surprised that that position was taken without talking to us in CARICOM, which was not what we expected. And we did pull that back a bit because Canada did come on board with us on the initiative with Norway in Barbados to try and get some dialogue going between the factions in Venezuela. So we like to think that there was a time when we had better relations with Canada, and we couldn't just sit by and watch Canada drift off from us because of lack of engagement. Plus, we believe that there are developmental issues that we can benefit from if Canada looks at us in the context of a region that can benefit from Canada's international development program. So that's what we're talking about.
Carnival question.
Carnival question. Finally a carnival question.
One, I'll tell you two. How are you going to be spending your carnival? And two, with respect to this controversy over the stage that Minister Rambarat had to intervene in, was there any lapse on the part of the government or state agency?
Let me answer the stage thing first. It's only in Trinidad and Tobago that a stage could cause such an exercising of the national psyche, right up to the cabinet. But I'll tell you one thing, though. I from Barbados, I saw the story about the split in the cabinet over the stage and the cabinet. And as head of the cabinet, I must tell you, I was quite surprised because, but something happened that I don't want to say ought not to have happened, but under normal circumstances would not have happened. A lot of the conversation about this stage is rooted in the fact that Minister Lovell went to Guadeloupe at the invitation of somebody who paid his ticket. I distinctly recall when I first came into cabinet in 1991 that Prime Minister Manning, who was one of the few people in the cabinet with any prior experience, said to us in his instructions to the cabinet that any minister of this government, of this country, traveling on government business must do so only at the expense of the people of Trinidad and Tobago or of an international agency of which we are a member. Meaning, don't take tickets and invitations from people. This situation in Guadeloupe, I must say, didn't follow that instruction. I think somehow we let our guard down here and had a minister accepting an invitation to be funded to Guadeloupe. That is now being raised in the context of, well, you were part of it, and no, you cannot say you don't know. Secondly, what was being engaged in is a stage, yes, but the action required a number of government agencies to sign off on it, and that was not done. The long and short of it is that to build that little structure, whatever it was, the approvals that are required under law were not had. And therefore the outcome was what it was. Now I see advice in some of the editorials that this is one of the problems that the country has. You can't have a FET without going through this. But it is not that you can't have it. Each of these agencies under law have certain requirements. So you can't have an office where the Director of Surveys in Agriculture signs off for EMA, and EMA signs off for the Maritime Services, and they sign off for fire. You know, you have to have the approvals from these agencies because each agency is involved under law for a particular reason. And if you try to bypass that, then you end up in this situation. And some people have difficulty telling you the whole story when it looks as if the story is a problem for them. So we have mishandled this in a way, but the bottom line is it was very straightforward. An idea, approval is required, approval is not had, and there were even instances of instructions not being carried out. That's long and short of it.
I know you have spoken earlier about the EU blacklisting of certain Caribbean countries, and this, in a way, links directly to the goals of the CSME in terms of building autonomy and resilient industries and so on in the Caribbean. In the meantime, while we try to work around the blacklisting, what are some of the things we will try to do to build resilience in our economies?
Well, I'm not so sure it's a question of resilience in the economy, because it doesn't matter how resilient our economy is. We will always have the need to participate in the international financial sector. This, in fact, threatens any resilience we're trying to build. And it is in an effort to build that resilience that financial services remain a part of, if not the lifeblood of what we do. Because we cannot operate our countries by simply being self-contained and self-served. We have to be out and reach out into the international economy. If we produce something for export, we have to sell it. If we buy something, we have to interact with the international community. We have children abroad going to school. We need medicine. We need medication. We need equipment. So we have a bond with the international community. What de-risking does is break those bonds and break them in such a way as to make it difficult and expensive for us to get the service and the contact that we need to build that resilient economy.
Just a follow-up to the Barbados-Trinidad Energy Agreement. Did renewable energy come up at any point during the discussion?
Yes, it's an area that we are focusing on, and only today Cabinet took a decision here in Trinidad and Tobago to proceed with our renewable energy initiative. You may recall that at an earlier time we spoke about, we went out for an RFP, we got responses, they were evaluated, and now we came to the point where two companies, incidentally two major companies here in Trinidad and Tobago, BP and Shell, they won the proposal, and today Cabinet agreed that we proceed towards advancing that. So in the not too distant future, as they finalize the power purchase agreement, that's going to come back to Cabinet for sign-off, and then we would be aiming to produce 130 megawatts of power from renewables.
Are you playing mass?
From playing mass?
Yeah.
Should I? I have had a very hectic week. You know, these meetings are very stressful. You know, all day and all night, But I think I should play mass.
Or you play mass all the time?
No, I don't play mass all the time. That wouldn't look good in papers, right? Yeah, I think I'm going to be out with the old Etienne's band on Monday, once the weather is good and there are no reason not to be out there. So I'll be out on Monday afternoon, and on Tuesday I should be out again with my normal. Yeah, I should be with our stars as usual on Tuesday. Providing, if they lose Panorama to invaders, they mightn't come out. But I'm hedging my bets, right? Yeah.
One last question from you with respect to the travel tax. I know that the president...
Sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Could you start over, please?
That's with respect to the travel tax.
The travel tax?
With the Act. I know the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Mr. Gonzalez, would have raised the issue of perhaps providing a travel rebate or refund for frequent travelers with respect to his country. I don't know if that is a possibility you may be open to as well.
I couldn't speak to that because I don't have any information on that, and that didn't come up as part of the discussion we had recently. What I do know is that some significant efforts being made to make Liat viable and to ensure that air transportation is available in a more affordable way. So those are just ideas people throw out. But that didn't form part of the discussion in any serious way recently. So we look forward to hearing that. Thank you all very much. Thank you for staying.
And that was live coverage of the weekly post-cabinet media briefing hosted by Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley on TTT Talk City 91.1 FM and on TTT Live online on Facebook. Remember, we'll have more on matters coming out of today's briefing in our major newscasts. I'm Stacey Ann Providence. Do have a good afternoon.